my cases and cases that were in the courtrooms through a different set of eyes. And I started noticing the ways in which courtrooms and judgments impacted on women differently. And so the phrase that I developed to describe this was around our struggle for equality, was that treating women as equal to men did not produce equality. I mean, the reality is that if you don't contextualize people's lives, you don't deliver justice. Treating as equal those who are unequal does not produce equality. And so that's what we have to keep repeating to ourselves. But one of the notions that underpins law, and it was something that we as feminist lawyers had to deal with, was the notion that law is neutral. That was one of the things, and it's one of the things to this day that still is fed to people, the idea of neutrality as being the underlying principle here, that making law in a neutral form cures all these problems. And of course it doesn't. And because we started off saying, all we're asking for is to be treated as equal, and then what we found was that actually that didn't do the business either, and that to do real justice you have to actually, there are issues about, substantive equality. Real equality involves having to contextualize what's happening in people's lives, the way that lives are led, and what happens beyond the courtroom door. When I started practicing 40 years ago, there were only 7% of practitioners were women. 7%. And so, there weren't that many of us around. And when you applied to Chambers, it was actually just before the Sex Discrimination Act. So the Chambers would automatically, quite readily say, we don't take women. I mean, they actually said it to you, we don't take women. And then we got the Sex Discrimination Act, and they said, women, we've got one. And you think, all I'm saying in telling you this is that law itself is vitally important in systemic change and in these structural imbalances. You have to start, of course, around the making of law that helps you to deliver justice. But law, black letter law on its own will not do it. Law itself will never deliver it. And we see that all the time now, still, with the problems that exist around sexual offences, with the problems that exist around domestic violence and so on, which continue to be problematic. And so you can bring swathes of law in and you can change it and say you can't cross-examine on sexual history except in the most exceptional cases, and somehow or other it doesn't seem to do the business. And it is because so much of this is so deeply embedded in the sort of, if you like, into our cultural norms. It is about the hegemony of our societies. That to unravel it it involves continuous peeling away at the layers of the onion, and you have to keep working at it incredibly hard, and you keep having to name it, and you keep having to bring people on. And one of the things that I feel very strongly is that if we really do want to deal with structural change, is the very thing that we're hearing people squealing about just now. Because, and I think it is worth, I'm sorry to do this to you, but I think it is worth looking at the current thing. I'm just now rewriting, or updating Eve Was Framed 25 years on. I've updated it once in between times. I did it in 2004. And huge differences have taken place. Since I started practicing at the bar when it was only a low percentage of women who were in practice, there's been a great proliferation of women in universities. We know this, the academy increasingly has women. Our law schools have got now significantly, it's getting up to 60%. Really high percentages of women doing law. They're still having serious problems getting into the kind of, if you like, the magic circle of law firms. The big commercial law firms are, women are not there in senior partnerships in a very significant percentage. It's only something like 17%, I think. Higher percentages in chambers, but still hurdles for women to get into those positions, but particularly to get to the higher levels of the judiciary. And of course, what is always said to us, yes, but we only appoint people on merit, and then we have to remind people that merit is not, an objective standard, and that you might have to unravel what does merit mean. And so we have all those difficulties, and you in all your different fields will know that some of these things are about structural change and structural imbalances, because when merit is presented, it's presented as a neutral concept, and we are going to be very neutral about all of this. And then you hear them talking about things like when I mentor all manner of people in the careers, men and women, and a young black lawyer was telling me recently about applying to become a judge, and how he didn't get the appointment that he wanted, and they said that they didn't think that he had a sufficient authority. And the interesting thing about that was, if you look down, that's the reason given to so many women's refusals. They don't have authority, and so you have to ask yourself, what does authority look like? And you can imagine what they think authority looks like. So that's one of the problems. What does decisiveness sound like? And then you get that whole problem. And I don't have to explain it to you. It's those kinds of things that you have to keep seeking to unravel. And we're doing it. And I am currently the president of Justice, which is a rather important sort of organisation for lawyers, and there's many judges in it and so on. And we did a piece of work recently led by a woman QC looking at the appointment of judges and to look at this whole process. And what the Lord Chancellor's part of the Justice Department is boasting of is the fact that now half of the appointments are going to women, but you look at where they are. And they're all down at the bum end of the list, let me tell you. They're all down being, in tribunals, in the lower courts and so on. And we've now done this sort of rather linguistic massaging, which is that people who used to be called stipendiary magistrates, paid magistrates rather than the voluntary community persons who give of their time, paid magistrates, stipendiary magistrates, are now called, I can't remember, it's something judges. Do you remember, Nick, what they're referred to as? District judges or something. They've got a title which means judge, says judge. So of course we're saying there's lots of women becoming judges, but let me tell you, they're all down at that end of the legal strata. And we're still not seeing significant numbers of women coming through. Now you have to ask questions then about what happens along this route, and where are these structural problems. And there's a serious fall off of the numbers of women who come into the profession, who overcome hurdles about getting into sets of chambers, getting traineeships in solicitors' firms and so on. But you see a serious depreciation when women are in their 30s. And it's that business of women having families and trying to make the whole thing work for them, and it not being a particularly family-friendly area of work. But it's also about the attitudes of people who work with them. And so those problems have to be challenged. And so for example, I'm firmly in favour of quotas now. And if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I'd have said, let's do targets with teeth. And Justice just now has brought out this report, and they're saying targets with teeth. Well, I'm afraid I don't believe that they ever have teeth, because it just somehow doesn't quite deliver. And I think that we have to really start saying, no, it's not good enough. We have to be aiming for, and your critical mass has to be a third, and you have to start there by insisting that that's done in relation to appointments. But at the moment, we're going to try out this system, which is of actually creating pools of people who are identified as people who want to be judges, and give them opportunities, and there's a sort of work being done on how you might try to bring people through the system to make sure that they get to the higher appointments. But we now have 2 women in the Supreme Court, and it took 13 years for the second woman to join the first. And I used to repeat that story about we've got one, thank you. So they felt that somehow it worked. So we have to challenge those things, the notions of neutrality. And this is in all your areas where you're trying to deal with structural change. They have to challenge the idea that equality is a sort of standalone thing, because if you don't contextualize it, and you don't go for substantive equality, ameliorative equality, where you're trying to make up for the historical disadvantages that women have had, then it's going to take us 100 years to get women in places of power. Why does it matter? And it matters because it really does affect outcomes. If you don't have diversity in the decision-making bodies in the places where there is power, then you are not going to see a change in the way in which power is acted out. And we know that from watching it. My regret is at the moment, I think that we're seeing in so many places in the political arena where, one might have been seeing sort of changes, we're not, because although we're seeing, we've got Angela Merkel and we've got Theresa May, and we're supposed to say that that's a source of celebration, the truth about it is that we're actually seeing a return to ideas of leadership which are machismo, which are authoritarian, and which are about strongman politics in terms of leadership, when we all thought that we were getting somewhere. So, when people are saying just now in relation to this, the grand sort of, are we seeing a witch hunt, or are we seeing a great sudden quantum leap forward for women, is the truth that it will make a difference for women, this business of women becoming more confident and coming out and talking about what's happened to them. But it will not, I'm afraid, create the great change that people are hoping for. And the reason why is because we're seeing the kickback that inevitably happens. And the kickback that's happening is to talk about witch hunts and so forth, and to do a muddying of the water to say, so I'm not going to be able to pat the knee of somebody whose mother's just died. I'm not going to be able to hug somebody who's just suffered a terrible, grievous wrong. I'm not going to be able to do all the good things as a member of parliament that I do to show that I am a compassionate, caring individual, but in fact we know that we're talking about, and they know that when it's something different. Mm-hmm. And when the touching of the knee is a fleeting stroke to indicate that I want more, and I can help you on the way if you're accommodating. And it's that transactional stuff. Young women know it, and they come to me and they talk about it, and they talk about the ways in which they go in thinking that they're going to be getting mentoring, and they end up finding that that it is of that transactional nature. And men do the most unbelievable things, and I know that it happens to young gay men, but I don't know many women who go around actually groping young men. You don't certainly hear very much of it. But the business of young women described